Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying.
Yes, guys, and welcome back to the Cannon podcast. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you are all good. We are here with a live data podcast, which is the first live data podcast that we've ever done. And joining me is the person who is the brains behind it all, the person who creates all of the quality graphics. It's George. Hi, George.
I'm very well, Farhan. Thanks again for a lovely intro. I feel so blessed. Yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm still riding the high of Real Madrid.
Yeah.
It was such a great win. I was lucky enough to be there as well, and like perfect view of all the goals. So it's been great. But yeah, how's things with you?
No, it's really good, mate. And not gonna lie, I'm still on a high. Like the social media team at Arsenal, the stuff they've been putting out, it's just like got me locked in. And there's this really good edit. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Instagram and it's on the X account as well, where it's got all the goal celebrations from Rice and Marino. And like the drop in the music as well is so good. I've had that on repeat for like 50
They're on point
times.
at the moment for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a weird thing because it's like in 17 minutes. I think it's 17 minutes we scored the 3 goals.
Yeah.
When I was there, the first goal, it's sort of like because of the view, I was like, did it go in? I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah.
And then the second one, and I've heard loads of people say this, and I honestly felt this as well, was like, Rice is going to score this.
Yeah.
And then the third one is like, it felt like we've arrived. And it was like,
Yeah.
that's just 17 minutes. So I know it can fall away and stuff like that, but I'm definitely riding that at the moment.
No, it's great. And I think that dopamine rush is still there with everyone as well. So today, this is a very different type of live, as I've already alluded to. It's the first data podcast that we've done live. And what we've been doing over the past few months, me and George, George has created the data center, and we've been going through different metrics, comparing different teams with different correlations. And that's something we've been sending out to Patreon and YouTube members once a month. Today, it's available for you to have a look at for free. But for future podcasts, future data podcasts, you will need to be able to. You have to become a Patreon or YouTube member, which you can access within the description below. You can also access the free trial, which is a 7-day free trial where you can get the data pod, you can get rewatches, ad-free main podcasts. And all sorts of different content. I think Alex has also got something very special lined up soon as well with someone else on a new show. So do check that as well. So we kind of want to make this very interactive, and also we want to be in a position where we can give you this content, the data center out there for all of you viewers, where you can actually access the tools, you can play around with all the things that me and George discuss, and that will depend on the demand. So if you guys want that, then do let us know, and we'll certainly look to try and implement that in the near future. But without further ado, what we're kind of going to go through today is effectively Europe's top 5 leagues, comparing Arsenal to all the other teams in Serie A, La Liga, Liga 1, the Bundesliga. So we're going to go through a lot of different metrics. You guys, please send your comments through. We'll try and go through as many of them as possible as we're presenting. And then the last 30 odd minutes of the show, we'll open it to questions, where we'll simply go through the questions and we'll try and answer them as best as we can. So without further ado, George, you've got the goods, as always.
Let's go for it. I'm going to share my screen now. So if you let me know whether it's worked. You can see that?
It has indeed, yep.
Perfect, yeah. So as Ryan said, this is a data center that I manage. And what I'm doing, just very quickly, is I'm getting data from a few different sources, such as FBref that you can see referenced on this, and just trying to build it into interesting, like Arsenal-centric views. In the past, we've looked at kind of different, we've called them health checks, but just how are we trending for metrics like goals per game, XG, possession, field tilt, things like that. But then for each of these episodes, we've done specific deep dives. And for this live episode, what we prepared was around, as Ryan said, analysis of taking data from the big 5 leagues.
Yeah.
I think it was quite interesting. It was something that I had in my mind as well, of like, obviously we think about Arsenal's performance certainly in the league, very relative to the Premier League. And we currently experience, Liverpool having a fantastic season. and then there's a few teams that have had good seasons, and there's underperforming teams like that. But the analysis that we've done and we'll go through today is just extending that to other teams as well.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through, probably based on the comments, the questions, different levels, all of these different metrics. And Rohan, for your benefit as well, for everyone, we can filter by each of the different leagues. And then this filter will then show by league position, because I think if you include all the teams in those leagues, there's 96. So there's quite a lot. And sometimes it's actually quite hard to spot where Arsenal are as well. So we got this slider to show teams by league position as well.
Yeah.
Starting, and this is a metric really just raw output. It's just looking at, I guess it'd be average goals scored and against per 90. It's quite interesting to sort of see Arsenal in context of the other teams across Europe as sort of, representing that kind of defensively hugely solid, but sort of in this interesting cluster of teams that aren't necessarily scoring lots of goals, but they're just so defensively secure. So for context, our goals against per 90 actually puts us 5th overall in Europe, with the only teams ahead of us is Atletico, Athletic Club, Napoli, and strangely Getafe as well. And I think when I sort of put this together, and this was actually before the first leg against Real Madrid, I think there was a debate around, because obviously Real Madrid played Atletico Madrid in previous time, which team we would have preferred. And I think a lot of the preference was towards Real Madrid, and I think specifically because of how defensively strong Atletico Madrid this season as well. And I think this highlights it for sure.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well, because like when you look at this, it kind of shows Real Madrid are a good matchup for Arsenal in that sense. But obviously, as a fan, you're worried about what Real Madrid have done in the Champions League, and I've referred to them as the final boss in the Champions League context. But this is really good to show that. And I think what I really want to stress here, and we'll go to one of the other graphics that we have that George has created later on. But when you look at Arsenal in terms of defensively, I've maintained that Arsenal, out of possession, they are the best team in the world. In terms of the variety in which we can kind of defend, both playing a high press, then being able to suffer. That's something that we're fantastic at. And Sander Berg, the Fulham midfielder, don't know if you saw it, but there was a clip where he spoke about how it feels like someone is in row 50 controlling Arsenal with a controller, and it's very difficult to create any sort of overload. And you can see here, just purely on the goals against per 90, how well we do. But also what's very impressive by this is when we look at Arsenal stylistically in terms of how we play, that's where this becomes very impressive in terms of how aggressive we are, and we're still able to produce that quality defensively. So yeah, it's something that we've been fantastic in. Certainly the attacking aspect, we'll get into more with some of the other stuff you presented, but we're in a very healthy quadrant there, specifically out of possession. And that's something we need to continue to be proud of, because when you look at Arsenal in the past, before the Arteta era, this was oblivious to us, being this assured. And yeah, it speaks volumes. And I think regardless of your position of Arsenal, whether you are a fan of Mikel or not, I think everyone can appreciate how much work and effort has gone into this team in terms of making it compact, drilling every single player, knowing what their roles are depending on the phase. And yeah, we've been fantastic in that regard throughout many years now. So
yeah, and I'll change the slider to show, kind of refine it more, maybe to like the top 5 or 6 teams, so we can really drill into some of the teams around us as well. But before then, what I also kind of noticed as well, and I'm not a big follower of football from the other leagues as well, but just generally seeing patterns that in Germany it's a lot more. There's a lot more goal output, and then the common cliche of the Italian teams that are in green is a lot more low scoring, it seems, as well. So it was really interesting to.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because that's kind of like a trend throughout Italian football as well. That is something that isn't new to us. We've became accustomed to that for many years. And I think what Michael says here as well, this is also considering the injuries that we've had and everything else behind it. And this is where I think certain things that we will present now, it's very impressive as to where Arsenal sit. There are things that we can improve on, which we'll go into as well. But I think that context is very important, specifically the red cards as well. And I do want to reiterate that point with one of the
Yeah, and I've got something on the red cards as well, because if I move to now looking at the underlying metrics, so rather than looking at the actual goal output, what was the XG per 90 and the XG against per 90 as well? Again, it's because there was obviously correlation between the two. It puts Arsenal in this sort of defensively strong, maybe less chance creation kind of quadrant. And that's kind of, it feels like a reflection, obviously, of what we've just shown. But Mark Stats, which is another resource, which is fantastic, that some of the other views will be based on, also has the XG per 90 and the XGA per 90, but only when both teams are at 11 v11. And so if I show that those stats, and there'll be slightly different methodologies between how these things are created, you can see that Arsenal do jump up in terms of the amount of XG they had when it's 11 v 11. I obviously at the start of the season when we had that cluster of red cards, this change was really pronounced. But obviously we've played more and more games where it's been 11 v 11. But there still is a trend, obviously, with dare I say it, Arsenal playing better when we have 11 players on.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting because I think there's other aspects in regards to the injuries that I think is preventing us from being able to reach our potential. But having said that, I still think, I know we're on a high. There are things internally that we can do better that allows us to move more towards that right quadrant. But again, defensively, Arsenal are fantastic, and again, it's that like I've mentioned already, there is a graphic at the end which will allow you to be even more impressed with what Arsenal are doing defensively when you consider how aggressive our lines are. But chance creation wise, I think we can go into that a little bit more in one of the graphics that you've got.
So we've looked at goal output and then the underlying kind of chance creation. I'm going to skip the XG over under performance and go straight into the attacking. So this is based on a view that we actually went through a couple of months ago. And just to give a quick explain of what it's showing. So on the x-axis, it's looking at average shots on target per 90. So how many shots do you expect a team to have over 90 minutes? And on this y-axis, what it's taking is the amount of touches, which is the amount of times individual players are doing actions, and a pass to another player is then a new touch. But specifically in the attacking third. And what I've done here is I've created a relationship between the volume of touches in the final third and then that resulting in a shot on target. So where you want to be is where the three sort of teams that are obviously doing very well in PSG's case have run away with the league, who have huge amount of shots on targets per game, but also they're taking fewer touches for that. And so taking it back to Arsenal, and this is what we established on the last time we reviewed it, is Arsenal along with Man City as well. Man City are, as we probably can guess, are incredibly high touch in the final thirds. And that just results in a lot of touches for every shot. So there's kind of like an inefficiency in that as well.
Yeah, this is really interesting because this is where I want to kind of look more into the things that we can do better. And I think there's both internal solutions, but also the big driver is external, bringing greater quality. I mean, we've seen, right, Mikel Merino, who has never played as a number 9 before, and the output that he's produced, but also his overall performance levels, particularly against Fulham and Chelsea, where I thought he was really good and gave us kind of like a centre forward-esque performance as well. And that's showing what Mikel can do with the players that he has at his disposal and what he could do with bringing greater quality in. But I think with this, what it shows, and I've felt that throughout watching Arsenal this season, and even last season, we play with our food too much. And we mentioned this in a previous data pod. I think it was 2 data pods ago, where you can see Arsenal in terms of the territory that we established, the number of touches that we have in the final third. And that's kind of exemplified by our high field tilt numbers, which we'll get into as well. But when we're in those areas, we don't play with enough instinct. And you look at someone like PSG, for example, they are very instinctive. You saw what Desiree Doué did in that game against Aston Villa. You saw what Nuno Mendes does as well. PSG are kind of like the polar opposite of Arsenal in this regard, where we think too much when we get in these situations. And I think that can only be solved drastically by bringing players who are able to kind of get shots off more quicker. And ironically, like someone like Gyökeres, who I've not watched enough of so far, from what I've read, he seems to be someone who does have that element within his game that can certainly improve us in this regard in terms of getting more shots off. So I think the big driver here is bringing in greater quality, but also I think internally, so it's difficult for me to explain without any pictures, but when Arsenal press, you imagine what we tend to do is we try and funnel teams towards our left-hand side. Well, our right-hand side and the opposition's left-hand side. Ødegaard being a massive part to this. And what happens is, as we're looking to squeeze that area of the pitch and looking to kind of deny the opposition from escaping, once we've got them wide, our opposite side winger comes a lot more inside to enable our defensive midfield or our left centre mid to push high, and also to give us that overload at the back with our back line and with Thomas Partey. And that means that we can have more security when the opposition goes long. So it's really good from a defensive point of view. But I always feel like when we win the ball back sometimes, the opposite winger is a little bit too deep. And when we win it, we're not in a prime position to succeed from that transition. And I think there's a really good account. Well, it's not I know there's a really good account, data EPL Analytics, who does really good stuff, and he looked at Arsenal in terms of the number of turnovers they've created, but then what follows in terms of getting shots off, we're not as good as what we should be, and that's something which I think internally we can tweak a little bit. That might leave us a little bit weaker, slightly weaker, but it could give us more impetus in terms of being able to convert these turnovers into successful transitions. But yeah, it's kind of the balance of, the biggest driver is bringing greater quality, but I think there are things that we can certainly do there to help us. But I want to get your thoughts on this, George. I don't know if you've watched a lot of Nico Williams and Gyökeres, but do you think those types of players could be something that can help us in that regard? I know, I think everyone would have seen Nico Williams in the Euros, for example, and what he was producing. And we saw Gyökeres against Arsenal anyway. So do you think there's anything these two players could certainly add?
Yeah, I mean, looking from this data as well, and I think, there's a few things that come to mind with it. And I do think personnel is hugely important. I think those types of profiles to be more instinctive will definitely help. And I guess this puts us as an outlier against City. So it's almost like, well, if you take more shots, are you going to score more and things like this?
Yeah.
I think the other thing is it certainly feels in City's case like and ourselves as a stylistic thing, as well of just how the teams play and want to have that control over a game. And what we'll go into maybe with some of the other views is also just the types of defenses where these teams, us, Arsenal in particular, are playing against. Yeah. And I think there's some other tactical stuff that I'm not necessarily an expert on around, but I've certainly listened to you guys around, central access and the types, the actual parts in the attacking third where we are getting these touches. So I think there's a few things, but I wouldn't say no to any of the players you just mentioned as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Nico Williams, I've said it many times on the pod, he's someone I'd love at Arsenal, because when I look at what Mikel requires from his wingers, being able to thrive in 1v1s, being able to create in isolation, Nico Williams thrives in that. He's certainly got more refinement within his game to do, particularly the decision-making in the final third at times. But when you're talking about someone who is a two-way winger, can beat you on the outside, can beat you on the inside, is great off both feet, works very hard, offers that intensity. He fits the stylistic profile that Mikel requires from his wingers. And I'm thinking to myself, I look at Nico Williams and what he could do in some of our recent games. You've seen what Martinelli's capable of doing, the level that he's produced in our last 3 games. Someone like Nico Williams could also do that as well. And it's about adding more layers and more quality and players who can give us that decisiveness in terms of playing with more instinct. And that's something I think Nico Williams certainly does. And I think it's the ability to get shots off of both feet that's something that I'm looking at. I think would really work well within our game model. But yeah,
I guess the other thing to think about is, this is data across the entire season,
yeah,
and I'd love to be able to present this to almost show what the kind of the recent trends are. I want to
yes,
remove like the recency bias of
yeah,
Real Madrid and cutting them to shreds, but and actually sort of say, well, is this something that maybe since players have returned or there's been certain changes in dynamics that this is something that we've improved on as well. So that's something I could look at.
for sure, for sure.
But yeah, Arsenal play with their food is the TLDR from that, and I think it's even more pronounced if you just look at touches
Yeah,
within the
I mean,
penalty
it
box.
shows it here, doesn't it? Yeah,
We really stand out in terms of just the volume of touches we take for every shot on target. So yeah, and I think the other thing is like, okay, well, if it's not just about volume of shots, it's also then looking at the shot quality. So
yeah,
this was my these two things are kind of paired in my head: is take fewer better shots, or just shoot on instinct, shoot on demand, and stuff. So
hmm,
the second view is kind of in keeping with that as well, and I'll bring this back down to the top six.
yeah,
Um, and actually, Arsenal aren't particularly well in terms of shot quality relative to these teams. When you look at the percentage of shots that we take that are on target, so there's an inefficiency there. But also then looking at the XG per shot on target, they're not particularly high quality.
hmm.
Um, and so it's sort of like we've kind of got the worst of both problems, maybe, where we're not taking maybe more shots than we could do, but of the shots that we are taking, it's not like they're high quality tap in chances as well.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because I think this ties into also at times where we do overthink in box situations and in the final third, where I've seen so many times where we're presented with a really good opportunity to have a strike at goal, but then we tend to go for a different avenue and we look to try and create a different scenario, and then the chance that was a big chance ended up not being a great chance at all, and I think that is where decisiveness and bringing someone in who can give us that edge. And I think George alludes to it a lot, in terms of that efficiency in box situations. I think this will improve us drastically in a lot of these different metrics that we've seen already. And that's why I think that the biggest driver is always going to be the quality. And when you look at Mikel's tenure so far, if you look at the investment across the squad, the attack has been what has been neglected the most, and now it is time for us to recruit in that area, because that's what's going to allow Arsenal to become the better version of themselves. Like, we can look at all the small things we can get better at that can marginally improve us. But what's the biggest driver? It's adding more pace into this team. It's adding more threat in 1v1s. It's adding more clinicality in box situations. Players who can shoot with conviction. These are things that are the staples of football, and I don't think we have enough of in the attack. And that's why I look at games like Real Madrid and seeing someone like Mikel Merino, who's never played as a number 9 before, and what we're able to do against Real Madrid. Imagine what we can do with greater quality, and players who actually excel in their roles, as opposed to shoehorning other players in there. So, yeah, this is where I get really excited because, I see where Arsenal are at. I see how good we are in so many facets of our play, in build-up, in the flexibility, in how we press. But we've still got so much more to add to our game and to improve. And that's exciting. And what's actually really exciting, I think George alluded to it as well, is like we don't really know. We don't have an exact idea of what Mikel really wants in a forward because we've not invested enough in that area. We all have ideas. Like I said, I think Nico Williams would be perfect at left winger Arsenal. But we've not seen the evidence yet of consistent recruitment in that area. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm really
I
interested.
think this and again the underspending in forwards is something that I have thought about, and something like what's the data on that, and obviously you have things like transfer marks and stuff to be able to see that. And I think when I did the analysis, since Arteta just joined, I think we're in the same spend bracket on forwards, such as I think it was around Brighton and Brentford, which
Yeah.
are obviously good teams, and they have invested on a few players like that, but it's not in the same bracket as some of the other teams. That's we're in similar sort of league positions around as well.
For sure, for sure. And this is an interesting run from Space Time, actually. And in regards to Semenyo, who gets a lot of shots off, good volume, but he alludes to his accuracy not being on point. I'm a massive fan of Semenyo. I actually think, again, when we look at players who stylistically fit the demands of what we currently see with our wingers, I think he has so many transferable qualities that would allow him to be a good fit. And also that Premier League experience. Before last season, well, last summer, if you look at the investment of our squad under Arteta and the percentage of it being players within the Premier League, it's significantly higher than most of the other so-called Big Six. Outside of Jurgen Klopp in the early days, where he was recruiting very heavy within the league, the likes of Wijnaldum and Robertson and Van Dijk. But yeah, have you watched much of Semenyo for Bournemouth? And
I mean, besides really good highlight reels and compilations, because obviously there has been links and stuff. Yeah, I mean, again, it's these are great profiles, and I guess it's its own podcast itself to discuss. Is he in the prospect category, or is he actually going to be a ready-made solution? I
yeah,
think when we went through these stats in particular last time, I think it was just as Wanyeri was breaking through as well. And I think one of the things you mentioned was that is a player that is certainly shooting much more
yeah.
on instinct as well. So there's solutions within the squads as well. But of all the things that I imagine Arteta is looking at, this is one of loads. So I'm not going to say that this is the silver bullet for us to
Yeah, and
finish.
how refreshing was it to see someone like Ranieri? The moment he gets into the half space, he
Yeah,
receives it, he turns, and then immediately you know what he's going to do. It's like when Kevin De Bruyne receives the ball high, he doesn't even look who's in the box. He's going to whip that
yeah,
ball across towards the back post, and it's down on other players to meet it. It's the same with Trent Alexander-Arnold as well. And I think that level of predictability, but it's just unstoppable to defend, is something we do need to add more of. And I think that's where this Arsenal team goes to another level. Adding a player who can just give you that consistently. And that's why I think when I've seen Ethan, the games, like I remember when he came on against Inter Milan as well, there was that moment just in the 90th minute, I think it was, where he turns, he shoots, it just goes over. We don't do that enough, and it's
yeah.
certainly been refreshing to see him do that. And I want us to recruit a player who can give us that for sure. So yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, lastly, before I move on as well, is like I'm going to watch more French football. I think it's all just like high XG, like shoot on sight. Love it. The next video I got is set pieces. Now, there's not a huge amount of data I could find on it, but when it, I suppose, comes to comparing Arsenal in Europe for set pieces, we're the best.
Yeah,
That's a do. But obviously, it is an important part of our game model now. But
well,
any opportunity to bring up these photos.
it's interesting because, right, so I mention it a lot, and I know people will be tired about it, but when I watched that Miguel Molina lecture, right, on Arsenal, and it was in 2020, the 2020-2021 season, and it was just before we played Benfica, and he showed the structure of Arsenal's game model, and it had different layers and different segments of what we demand, and it's high press, being comfortable without the ball, and the other thing was set pieces as well. There are other aspects as well, but set pieces was highlighted in bold as well. And I know we get clowned a lot by it at times with how, Arsenal are becoming too orientated on set pieces, not enough on open play, which I do push back on personally. Although, like I've mentioned on the pod many times, there are things we can do better in open play to generate more threat. But when you're a team like Arsenal, with the amount of territory that we have and the dominance we show, naturally you're going to be receiving a lot of corners because of the possession, because of the threat that you're posing in terms of pinning teams deep. So you need to be able to maximize them, and Arsenal do that, and that's certainly a massive positive for me. And the job that Nicholas Jover has done, these are fine margins that we've dictated our way from bringing people in who are so smart, who are so innovative, and we continue to have innovative solutions in our set pieces. And it becomes unstoppable to defend against, because it's like we have the coaching, we have the ideas, but also the execution from the likes of Declan Rice and Saka. And then when you've got the players that we have in the box, the likes of Gabriel, Saliba, it's very difficult to defend against, and we're fantastic at it, and I think we should be very happy that we're a team that we know we're gonna dominate these scenarios. So yeah, I did want to get your thoughts on. I'll give my thoughts on this, but it was from Victor, and it's kind of going back to the shot quality thing. And he asked, low shot quality is also a result of our focus on going wide. Our central access isn't good, so I wonder if that could be an issue. So I mentioned this a lot now. Very quickly, 22-23 Arsenal, very vertical. The mindset was fast-paced, forward. Teams set up differently against Arsenal back then, and it allowed us to really play this freely in terms of accessing central spaces. The way that we were inverting Zinchenko, teams didn't know how to defend against it. The winger was following him, so that opened up spaces out wide, and then we could access the centre because teams were pressing, were looking to go a lot more man-to-man in central spaces. And that allowed us to have really good joy centrally. But what happened as that season went on, teams did start to adapt to Arsenal a lot more, and we were giving the ball away a lot more by going vertical and by trying to play our same way. And there were more transitional opportunities for the opposition. And there are certain games in which this was very painful to watch. And then the following season, Arsenal went with more of an approach in which we wanted to dial down on that a little bit more because of how the opposition was setting up, but also to give us more security when we do lose the ball. If we funnel wide, if we lose the ball wide, it leads to the transition from the opposition not being as threatening. But at times, I feel like that dial has been moved a little bit too much towards the wide areas. But I think it's also due to how teams are setting up. Whereas if you look at the Champions League, you look at the games against PSV, Real Madrid, these are not teams who have studied Arsenal a lot, and look how freely we're playing centrally, because teams are allowing us to do so. So I think that the way in which we're going to be able to improve our shot quality, we can do it by going wide, and we can continue to do it by the way that we're playing now. It's then a case of when we get into those box situations where we have players who are going to play more instinct, and we're going to look to shoot on sight, and we're going to be able to increase our volume in that regard. So I know that's really long-winded, but
that's perfectly explained. And I think it also relates to the set pieces point. And one of my favorite, what would I say, Alexander Moneypennyisms is the other team gets to do tactics as well. And any advantage you can get around, if we're creating chances from set pieces, let's take advantage of it. It seems to have, I remember you guys discussing it, proven to be a sustainable model, but eventually we'll have to find other ways to do it. And this is the great thing about football. There's the evolution of meta, then counter meta, and stuff like this. But
the other thing also, the other thing I think that's worth noting is that the moment we start putting players who are more comfortable receiving inside the block as well, I think you'll see Arsenal become a little bit more dial up more vertical as well and look to access the centre against teams in the Premier League as well. Like if you get Mars Lewis-Skelly more inside the block, that is someone who is confident in those areas. And look at the amount of times which players are looking to give him the ball in these scenarios because they trust him. They trust him to be able to turn and evade that pressure. He's that perfect kind of release valve who can play in those pockets. And it's like what Jesus did. Jesus was able to do that because of that qualitative edge that he gave and something that he excels in. So yeah, it's also on who we put in certain parts of the pitch as well.
It's a great point to bring up Miles and his like how he's just at the moment locked down that position. And I think compared to obviously when Zinchenko joined, he really established, and it felt like that was our meta at the time was our ability to create overloads in the midfield. But it still felt like it was obviously a lot deeper where Zinchenko was taking his actions, and it was more around control and build up. Whereas, just from the small sample of seeing Lewis-Skelly play, it's chaos. It's dribbles, it's progressive, it's and so that would be really interesting as well to see, how these metrics might start to change as you're creating more disruption in the back line. And to the comment as well, like what I absolutely love is I'm presenting kind of like aggregate season numbers where we're having to like provide the context around that. We'll see. I'd love to see kind of these metrics, and one day I'll find them where you can almost, you've seen the metrics around the wide left, the wide right, and the centre, and just how much build up goes through each of those things.
Yeah, that would be
I'd
really
love
good.
to see the output of saying, well, when we build from the left, it's this likely to end in a shot on target with this amount of XG, and that would be fascinating to go through. Which side are we creating the higher volume and better chances from as well?
Yeah, which we know is obviously the right hand side, but being able to quantify that as well
Yeah,
would be very interesting as well, and especially with how teams are now starting to defend against us through our right hand side. I remember Thomas Tuchel gave some sort of a blueprint on how to mitigate the threat that Arsenal provide through the right hand side. And again, it's very difficult to do so, even if you have that idea when you have got someone like Bukayo Saka. But teams are going a lot more aggressive and more man to man towards our right hand side, and it's forcing us to find other solutions, either through that right hand side or kind of going through the left and then switching it quickly so that then we can create more space for the right. And that's why I felt it was very interesting playing against Real Madrid, because Real Madrid did not do their homework. Like Jude Bellingham came after the game and he mentioned how there was a tweak that Arsenal did that kind of certainly hurt Real Madrid. But if you watched Arsenal this season, you watched Arsenal last season, Arsenal didn't do anything particularly innovative. It's the way that Real Madrid didn't study Arsenal that really allowed us to have the platform and then to really have success in that game. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll go on to the next tab as well, which I think highlights the next two as well. But it definitely goes to the point. I've noticed this just this season, how sort of the Champions League has felt different, because you're playing teams that haven't followed you week in, week out, and built that game plan against you as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Real Madrid certainly got caught out with that. Cool. So control. So what we've done for control and how we're displaying that is looking at average possession for a game on one axis, but then also field tilt. And I'm sure I don't need to explain what field tilt is, but particularly
Alex and George love it.
I know, but the way that it's been calculated is share of possession, but only looking on each other's attacking third. So I think by them putting them against each other, you can kind of see the difference between overall possession versus possession in those dangerous areas. And there is a case, and I think if I go further back, and I don't know if it was the same, but it was certainly like Southampton came to mind. I'm not even sure where Southampton are now, but they were very much, and this was on their previous manager, Russell Martin. It was very possession heavy, but the possession wasn't in dangerous areas. Mm-hmm. Whereas obviously focusing here, Man City are still consistently top for field tilt, and obviously you have these, the big teams in their respective leagues as well tend to dominate possession and field tilt. But Arsenal have I looked on this season, and there has been drops in overall possession and field tilt. But again, I think there's obviously game state things and other reasons that's come up as well that we've obviously discussed.
I think for me, this is kind of like the adversity that we have faced this season and the turbulence both of injuries and red cards. I think this has a massive part to this and has influenced this a lot. And like if you go back at previous seasons, Arsenal are right up there in that top right quadrant, both in terms of possession and field tilt. I find it very interesting, the point that you made about Southampton, right? Because this is where I was talking to Alex about this homogenous behaviour that we are seeing in the Premier League, and teams all the way from the bottom of the table press baiting, luring the opposition in and trying to find advantages by doing that, by using their build up, dropping certain players in to then escape. And you can see Southampton, pretty decent possession, but it's all in their own half, and this is something that has been happening throughout the entirety of the Premier League. And what I find interesting as well, to just take it away from Arsenal, Nottingham Forest are your kind of traditional, counter-attacking team, and they do it so well. They've got the pace, they've got the fluidity of your Elangas, your Callum Hudson-Odoi. They've got Chris Wood, who holds the ball up really well, wingers going inside, breaking quickly, being solid without the ball, defending in a lower block, and they're having a lot of success to it. So I've found that's what it's really interesting, because it's showing Nottingham Forest are finding a way, finding success this season, consistent success, and success that isn't by luck. If you watch a lot of their games, they deserve the results they've had. but they're doing it by going against the norm of what teams are tending to do through this homogenous behavior of looking to build, looking to lure opposition players in, being comfortable in doing so, but then conceding a lot of goals because the players are not comfortable in doing so, and this is where I think the Vincent Kompany point that I've mentioned a fair few times, where Vincent Kompany, again, it's kind of similar to like Russell Martin in terms of how he wants his teams to play. Players that he had at Burnley weren't comfortable in doing that, but that's landed him the Bayern Munich job, because he was true to the principles that is perceived as what is the only way you can get success in today's game. And this is where I think Gary Neville had a rant about it as well, being not what fits his ideological idea of football and what he grew up watching.
Which I would disagree with Neville's point on that as well. I think this is Forest, which is great that you brought up, are a great example of finding a new way and not just cookie cutter game models where you take it from one club to the next, and you just might not even have the profile of player to support it. Forest have found something that's worked this season, and they don't. These metrics suggest that they don't need a lot of the ball to be able to do it.
Yeah. Do you think they'll get it? Champions League?
I hope they don't chase us. Who knows?
What do you think? Oh, yeah.
I actually haven't checked how many points.
I think we've got a decent gap. To be fair,
That's fine.
We've got some good fixtures coming up as well.
I hope they do, and obviously there is that extra Champions League place, I believe, as well. And there's different permutations of Chelsea, City, Newcastle for that. I mean, I don't know. I still look up and I still look ahead, and Liverpool chase. That's the target rather than But I don't want to take Champions League football for granted. But I imagine even with the extra space, finishing second has a lot more advantage of finishing third, fourth, and fifth in terms of just the volume of games you've got to play with qualifying. So 100%. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? And Victor mentions Bayern. Yeah, Bayern do very well in pretty much all of these graphics that we have, and I think they do very well in the next one as well that you've got. So
this is actually Rohan's idea as well. So I referenced MarkStats, who's great because it's got all these different metrics that are generally hard to find. I'm getting the data from the web. I'm not getting like the raw events from Opta and doing lots of analysis. I'm like, finding interesting stuff and then trying to compile it into something that kind of tells a story that me and Rohan can go through. And with MarkStats, one of the things that they measure is around defensive line height, both the defensive line height for your team, but also the opposition team that you're seeing as well. And this is measured in meters from goal. And so the exact definition he uses is like, what's the average point that you're making a defensive action from relative to the meters from the goal? Long-winded way of saying, Arsenal are currently around this top tier in terms of playing with amongst pretty much the highest line in Europe. But I thought what was quite interesting, particularly, I could quickly zoom out just to give context because obviously there's a lot of teams to do. We're also playing quite considerably against the lowest blocks as well in Europe. And I thought, that really speaks to maybe quite a few of the other points that we've already discussed around chance creation and shot quality and the amount of, shots that we're taking and things like that. We are, according to MarkStats, playing the lowest blocks in Europe at the moment.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I want to reiterate the fact that Arsenal playing against the lowest blocks doesn't mean that Arsenal do not have space, beyond the opposition defensive line. Teams, naturally, what they look to set up with is a mid-block. That is their idea they start with. But Arsenal, the team that pushes these blocks deeper and teams are more they're more hesitant of Arsenal relative to other teams, and that's represented here. But what I really want to reiterate and stress, and we saw the excellence of Arsenal in terms of goals conceded per 90, expected goals conceded per 90, and like Forest in the sense, Forest do very well defensively. But what you saw, you can see here as well. Forest deploy a very deep line. The deepest line, the deepest defensive line out there in Europe. So Forest have been fantastic defensively, but it's easier to be good defensively when you are sitting deeper. Arsenal are doing what they're doing defensively whilst maintaining such an aggressive defensive line. And that's what I really want to reiterate and how impressive it is. To be able to press high, to be able to squeeze as we do when we get into the final third, whilst conceding virtually nothing game in, game out. That's a testament to how well this team is coached and how Gabriel, Saliba, they give this team the platform to be able to do what we do with the territory that we have in the final third because of how good they are defensively in 1v1s, how well they work as a partnership, their ability in the channels, and how good Arsenal are in terms of being able to defend as a unit when we're suffering. We're so good, and I really want to stress the fact that we are this good defensively whilst being this aggressive. And once we start adding more quality in our front line, it's scary hours, like scary hours.
I love that as well. And I think that also speaks to some of the midfield as well. I mean, I think Thomas Partey's been in really strong form, but having someone like Rice as well, who's so good at rest defense, allows you to play with that high line and push teams back.
And also from Whole Milk, he mentions about the connection that Raya has with the defensive line as well, and I think that's spot on. Like David Raya, do you sit North Bank for the Madrid game, was it? Or
North Bank, yeah.
North Bank, yeah. But like the first half, I don't know if you saw it, but the amount of times in which Kylian Mbappe was peeling away, and he's just too quick, like to be able to stop him in that fashion. David Raya's aggressive positioning as well really allows us to be able to play this high as well, because you have that confidence in a keeper who is so comfortable off his line. There were two moments in that game where Kivior plays him, a bobbly back pass that's difficult to deal with, and David Raya just first time left-footed pass and it gets us going. Those things are so important, and the confidence that it installs to others is such a positive ripple effect. And I think that unit that we've had, it's obviously unfortunate that Gabriel has sustained the injury that he has right now, but I think what Arsenal have been blessed with under Arteta is the partnership and the stability of a David Raya, of a Saliba, of a Gabriel, and previously as well with Ramsdale, Saliba, Gabriel. We've been able to have significant continuity there. And I think that's played a massive part in terms of why Arsenal are so good out of possession, both in a deeper block when we're suffering, but also the main aspect of our game in terms of pressing high, the aggression that we show with our defensive line. It's something to be really impressed by.
That's awesome. Yeah. And then the last few I prepared, was around match output. And I thought these are, again, it's a bit quirky as well, but what I've looked at is the actual points per game this season that teams have had. And then I've just made it relative to what the estimated weekly wages. And I think I got this from Capology or something. I just wanted to see how much that, because I've heard it before, is it's not necessarily a cause and causality, but you have better players who are paid more, you will expect better output and things like that.
Yeah,
it's certainly the case. When you look at obviously the teams that are in this quadrant, who are and Arsenal are included in that as around some of the biggest spenders on wages per week.
Yeah.
But when I put this together out of interest, the first thing is obviously just the Premier League is considerably pays players more than average, and what I'll go into a sec is trying to normalize that within each of the countries, because then that changes it. But Manchester United, man,
it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. Like the wages that you have there. Sorry, but you need more output, don't you? That's why teams like Leverkusen, Napoli, very impressive. But I think the general trend here, is the teams that pay the best play the best.
I was just interested to look at it as well, and I think I was also obviously aware that because the Premier League tends to pay the most, just to try and normalize that data slightly. So hopefully I can explain this okay. But what this is looking at is, let's take Real Madrid, for instance. relatively Real Madrid are playing way more for wages compared to other teams in Spain. And so what happens is the Premier League teams start to bunch up a bit more because you've got less of that distribution.
Yeah.
You can, this is just a visual thing that you can then see actually amongst those four other leagues that we've discussed, that actually there are a small amount of teams that are obviously, you know, paying the most and, you know, capturing the best talent in those leagues as well.
For sure, for sure. And I did want to get to this from space time, and it was going back to the defensive line and looking at Barcelona. I think Barcelona, yeah, they're right up there. But I agree. When I've watched Barcelona this season, you know, what stood out for me, they have the best front three in the world in terms of the connections between them, how they play with each other, the synergy. Lewandowski, Rafinha, and Yamal for me is stand out the best. But I feel like games with Barcelona, from what I've seen this season, it's very basketball-y, you know, and like that's where like you're seeing a team that is so aggressive, but they're conceding a lot of opportunities as well. I'll be interested to see the numbers behind Barcelona. Actually, you've got that, haven't you? Barcelona's um oh yeah,
If I go back to just looking at the raw numbers, yeah, so third in the top five leagues in terms of the amount of XG they're creating, but
yeah,
13th in terms of the amount of XG they're
yeah.
conceding. So yeah, it's
Yeah, it's better than what I thought. To be fair, I mean, I've not watched loads of Barcelona, but I did feel like they would be a little bit more leaky. But yeah, but I do think that, you know, when you look at a Barcelona and how aggressive they are, kind of similar to Arsenal, but the gaps that they leave and how I don't think they're as much in unison relative to Arsenal. I think that's where you see a difference in terms of defensively. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm very interested in these Champions League games as well, with the opportunities of a Barcelona maybe in a final if we get there, PSG in the semi-final. Yeah, it's really interesting.
it does go back to, like, you know, obviously there's a second leg for Real Madrid, but it you know, it was feeling when the draw was made that you know, we're meeting the final bus early.
Yeah.
But certainly if we, you know, if we do get through, they're going to be tough games, and I don't even need to show you data to sort of suggest how well both teams have been playing in their league and certainly in the Champions League this season.
Yeah, and this is a good point of observation. A lot of offsides do save them, yeah. So it kind of gives me that Unai Emery vibe as well. Last season with Aston Villa were playing teams offside consistently, but it is very, very borderline. But yeah, no, I'm actually really excited about what's to come in the Champions League. I'm really excited with the data pod as well. You know, we're going to be looking to do this regularly. It's, you know, we look to have it once every month, and we want it to be as interactive as possible for you guys. You know, me and George always open up questions on the Discord, which you can access by becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. And we've had lots of good feedback in terms of what people have been interested in wanting us to talk about. And that's what we want you guys to do, just to give us, you know, your thoughts and opinions on things that you find interesting, and we'll look to kind of continue to upscale this specific type of content that we'll be bringing in regularly. So yeah, that's pretty much all from me. George, any final closing thoughts?
No, I've enjoyed it. This is my first live pod,
Yeah,
and it's been great. And I think being in an environment where we can also get kind of live comments in, and just to reiterate Rohan's point is, if the data is available, I've got the curiosity to try and find it and turn it into something. And in fact, there's been a couple of examples in the previous pods, like Rohan said, that we've taken ideas and comments from the Discord and then fleshed it out into a kind of an episode to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, literally, there was a comment on one of the videos on YouTube where someone wanted to see Arsenal in terms of, you know, our efficiency in the final third, and that's where we came into being able to quantify Arsenal playing with their food too much, which was a thought process that I had for quite a while, and we were able to kind of present that. So yeah, if there's anything you guys want to see, please do let us know. And like I said already, if you want to be able to access the data center, and the demand is there, we will certainly look to try and implement a way in which you guys can actually play with it. You know, that is certainly something that we want to do, but it's a case of if you guys really want that. And other DataPod episodes. This is very much a rare occasion which we do a live. We just wanted to allow you guys to see what we've been doing. We've been creating more and more and more. There's so many different things now that George has created, and we're going to continue to do that. And if you want to access that alongside rewatches, main pods that are ad free, TCP Live that's ad free, instant reactions ad free, etc. It's all there. You can access it by getting the free trial, a 7-day free trial, to become a Patreon or YouTube member. So yeah, that's all from me. Tomorrow, Brentford, score predictions.
I'll be at the game. I think there's a good chance that this is. I don't even thought about it. I hate score predictions. A 3-1, 3-0.
3-0. Yeah, I fancy a 2-0. I really want to see Calafiori. I want to see some changes, and really excited for it. But no, thank you so much, George, for tuning in. Really appreciate you're the brains behind this. What you do, it's fantastic, and you guys in the chat, thank you so much for your comments. And last but not least, thanks for keeping it Arsenal.
Come on, Jamie. Yo, VIP. Let's kick it. Rice, baby. Yes. Rice, baby. All right, stop. Collaborate and listen. Rice is back with my brand new invention. Something got a hold of me tightly. Flow like a harpoon, daily and nightly. Will it ever stop, yo? I don't know. Turn off the lights, yo. And I'll go to the extreme. I rock a mic like a vandal. Light up the stage, so watch a light like a candle. Gonna resonate, killing that brain with the woodiness mushroom deadly. When I play it, don't ready. Anything less is the best, it's a felony. Love it, I hate it, I better gain weight. You better hit the rules and keep no way. And if there was a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Pick out the right with my DJ result. Rice, baby.
Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying.